Liam Parker was never afraid of the woods. Not as a boy, when he and his friends would sneak off past curfew to tell ghost stories by the creek. And not now, as a 33-year-old man with a battered old tent and a thirst for solitude. The hum of city life had begun to wear him down, so he did what he always did when the world got too noisy. He packed his gear, drove into the deep, black woods, and let the silence wash over him. This time, he chose Black Hollow Forest, a stretch of wilderness about 2 hours from town, rarely visited except by the occasional hunter or desperate hiker. He set up camp by a small clearing with towering pines that swayed gently in the breeze. As the sun bled out behind the tree line, he built a modest fire and set up his camera, a habit he'd picked up from his weekend vlogging attempts. "All right, folks," he said, flashing a grin at the camera. "Liam here, back at it again, with another weekend getaway. It's just me, the trees, and whatever might be lurking in the shadows." He waggled his fingers dramatically. The fire crackled, filling the silence. Liam took a sip from his flask and let the warmth spread through his limbs. There was something special about nights like this. Untamed, pure, untouched by the world beyond the trees. An owl hooted in the distance. A few cicadas buzzed lazily. Otherwise, it was silent, too silent. Liam frowned and glanced around. The usual nocturnal rustlings, squirrels darting through the brush, the occasional crack of twigs underfoot, was strangely absent. He shook it off. He was alone. Just how he liked it. With a final swig from his flask, he switched off the camera and crawled into his tent, zipping it shut. Sleep came easily. The next morning, Liam stretched and yawned, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He checked his camera, eager to review the footage and maybe even find something interesting for his next video. He clicked play, watching himself joke and drink by the fire. But something in the background caught his eye. Just beyond the glow of the flames, past the first line of trees, a pair of red dots flickered in the dark. Liam paused the video, leaning in. The eyes, because that's what they had to be, right? Blinked, not like an animal's, but in unison, as if whatever was out there was mimicking him. He rewound the footage. There they were again, blinking, watching, his stomach twisted. He had heard nothing, seen nothing. Swallowing hard, Liam turned off the camera and stepped outside. The fire had long since died down, leaving only embers and the stale scent of smoke. The trees stood motionless, their shadows stretching like fingers over the damp earth. "Hello?" he called. His voice felt too small, too human, in the vastness of the woods. Nothing. He shook off the unease and convinced himself it was just an animal, probably a deer. Maybe the camera had picked up a reflection. But deep down, a small voice whispered, "That's not what deer eyes look like." The day passed without incident. He hiked, fished, and even laughed at himself for being spooked by a pair of glowing dots. By nightfall, he was settled back by the fire, the flask warming his insides again. "All right," he said into the camera, forcing a grin. Night 2, still not eaten by Bigfoot. He chuckled, but it felt hollow. The feeling of being watched hadn't left him. He decided to keep the camera rolling longer this time, leaving it pointed toward the woods as he climbed into his tent. Something woke him. A rustling, a shuffling, close. Liam's breath hitched. His first thought was bear, but bears don't whisper. He stayed frozen, ears straining. There it was again. A soft, deliberate rustling, moving in a circle around his tent. slow, purposeful. Then, the zipper moved. Liam lunged, grabbing the knife from his pack and flinging the tent open, his flashlight cutting through the blackness. Nothing. Not a damn thing. His pulse thundered in his ears. He shined the light around, illuminating only trees and emptiness. The wind sighed through the branches. His mind raced. Had it been a dream? A trick of the wind? But the woods felt different now. Hollow, watching, expectant. Shaken, he hurried back inside and zipped the tent all the way up. At dawn, he checked the camera, hands trembling. The recording started with him by the fire, then shifted to the tent as the night stretched on. And then, just past the 3-hour mark, the footage changed. The fire was nothing but dying embers, casting just enough glow to reveal the trees. The forest looked empty, at first. Then one by one, the red eyes opened. Not just two, dozens, blinking in unison, staring closer than the night before. Liam's stomach dropped. His own muffled snores played faintly through the speaker. He had been asleep, completely unaware that he was being surrounded. Then, movement. The camera caught something stepping forward, something tall and thin, its limbs unnaturally long, its fingers tipped with something sharp. The red glow came from within its face, as if it wasn't just eyes, but something burning inside its skull. And it had been standing just outside his tent. The last few seconds of the video made his blood run cold. The thing didn't just stand there. It reached for the tent zipper. Then, as if it knew it was being watched, it turned its head toward the camera, slowly, unnaturally, and blinked once before the footage cut to static. Liam left that morning. He didn't pack up neatly. He didn't care. He threw his gear into the truck, peeled out of Black Hollow Forest, and never looked back. He never posted the footage, never told a soul. But at night, when he closes his eyes, he still sees them. The red eyes blinking in the dark, waiting. Dylan Carter had built his YouTube channel on urban exploration. Abandoned houses, ghost towns, forgotten places that time had swallowed. His subscribers loved the eerie thrill of it. The way he wandered through empty spaces, flashlight flickering, whispering into the camera like he was leading a seance. But this trip was different. This trip felt wrong from the start. The place was called Ravenwood Campground, a collection of rotting cabins and overgrown fire pits, hidden deep in the Wyoming wilderness. It had been shut down in the early 90s after a string of disappearances. 3 campers, all in separate incidents, gone without a trace. Some locals said a bear got them. Others said something else did. Dylan didn't believe in ghost stories. He believed in content. And Ravenwood, with its dark past and decaying remains, was the perfect place for his next video. He arrived late in the afternoon, parking his truck at the old ranger station. The sky was already bruising toward dusk, and the wind carried the sharp scent of pine needles and damp earth. The road leading into the camp was cracked and broken, nature slowly reclaiming what man had left behind. "All right, guys," he whispered into his camera as he walked. "This is Ravenwood. Place has been abandoned for over 30 years. Let's see if we can find any ghosts." He chuckled, but it felt forced. The silence of the place was thick, pressing. He hadn't seen a single animal, not a bird, not a squirrel. Just the trees, towering and still, His boots crunched over the gravel as he made his way past the skeletal remains of a playground, a rusted-out canoe, and the first few cabins, their roofs sagging inward. The deeper he went, the darker it seemed to get, as if the trees leaned closer, conspiring to keep him in. Then he found the tent. It sat alone in a clearing near the main fire pit, its fabric torn, its poles snapped like brittle bones. Mold crawled up the sides, and the entrance gaped open like a hungry mouth. It was old, too old. A remnant from before the camp shut down, maybe even from one of the missing campers. Dylan felt a shiver creep up his spine. He swung the camera around, framing the tent in the dying light. "This thing's been here a while," he murmured. "I don't know if it belonged to one of the missing people, but it's definitely been out here for decades." A gust of wind pushed through the trees, rattling the canvas. He stepped closer, aiming his flashlight inside, and froze. There was someone inside, a man, sitting cross-legged in the shadows, staring straight ahead. His face was gaunt, sunken, as if he hadn't eaten in years. His skin was grayish, stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. His eyes, God, his eyes were empty, too empty, like two holes cut out of reality itself. Dylan's breath caught in his throat. His fingers clenched around the camera. "Sir," his voice came out weak. The man didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. Dylan took a step back, his brain scrambling for logic. Maybe it was a mannequin. Maybe some sicko had put it here as a prank, but the air around him felt wrong, thick, charged, humming with something unseen. Slowly, shaking, he turned the camera toward himself. Guys, I think I just..." A sound, a low, wet exhale. Dylan spun back to the tent. It was empty. The man was gone. He stumbled back, heart hammering. His flashlight beam jittered across the ruined fabric. There was no way. No way. He had seen him. He had filmed him. The clearing was silent. The wind had died. Then, a twig snapped behind him. Dylan whipped around. Nothing. Just trees. Just dark. A feeling crawled up his spine. The awful certainty that something was watching him. That if he turned his back again, he wouldn't be alone. Fumbling, he shut off the camera, shoved it into his backpack, and bolted. He didn't check the footage until he was back home, safe in his apartment, doors locked, lights blazing. With a deep breath, he clicked play. The video started as expected. His walk through the camp, his commentary, his discovery of the tent. Then, the moment he panned inside, the man was there, sitting, staring, exactly as he remembered. His stomach knotted. He scrubbed forward. The moment he turned the camera on himself, the moment he heard the exhale, and then he paused, his blood turning to ice. The man, he hadn't disappeared. He was still there, sitting, watching, but something was different. His head had turned, no sound, no movement, no blur. Just one frame, then the next, staring directly at Dylan's back, like he had always been watching. Dylan slammed the laptop shut, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to push away the image, but it was burned into his mind. The way the thing had turned, not like a person, but like a thing pretending to be a person. The next morning, he deleted the footage, but it didn't matter. Because that night as he lay in bed, something whispered from the corner of his room,